It's the second day of the convention now. We've heard a lot from the older generation, lots of interesting ideas. Now it's time to talk to the voices of the future. The young people on this panel are among some of the people who's going to be most affected by the longer term consequences of this election, of Brexit, of issues like climate change. So I think it's really important they get to have a say. So starting from the left, I have Hannah Clare, who's co-chair of the Young Greens, and she represented the Green Party in the Channel 4 Young Leaders debates in 2015. Next to her is Caroline Hill, who's currently National Chair of Young Labour, and before that she coordinated the Labour Young Trade Unionist Network. Then we've got Jack Hughes, co-vice chair of the Young Liberals, and he's also the youth representative on the Liberal Democrats East Midlands Executive. Then we've got Yasmine El-Tourgman, she's digital officer at My Life, My Say, which is a non-partisan youth-led movement on a mission to secure a better Brexit for young people. And then we've got Tom Slater, who's deputy editor of Spiked magazine, and he led their, what was it called? Invoke Article 50 Now campaign immediately after the referendum, which was calling on the government to invoke Article 50 immediately. And then we have Hugh Bennett, who is deputy editor at Brexit Central, and who worked on the Vote Leave campaign. Let's launch straight in then. So my first question is for everyone on the panel. We'll start at the left. What do you think the biggest issue for young people is in the upcoming general election?
I think there are a number of issues, but I think one of the things, and I'm not just saying it because we're here today, is Brexit. And I think it's the effects of young people, because ultimately everything is now sort of coming from this, whether it's our environmental regulations or whether it's other policies. Well, what policies are we going to keep? How hard is the Brexit going to be? And ultimately, young people having a voice in this election could change that.
Hugh, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, no, I mean, unsurprisingly, I'm going to say, Brexit as well. I think Brexit it's not just what happens in the next 2 or 3 years. Brexit is going to shape what our democracy is like, what our country is like for for generations to come, and really making sure that we get the right sort of Brexit. Obviously a lot of that's going to be contingent on negotiations, but we also need the right people there to actually be doing these negotiations, because that what's at stake is huge. The legacy of Brexit is going to be, how democratic is our country? How close are people to power in politics? Can we actually use Brexit as an opportunity, to really boost public engagement with politics again, and set us on the path to a truly democratic society again.
Yasmine, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, and just to add to what Tom was just saying, young people are hearing a lot about Brexit. So we're hearing hard Brexit and soft Brexit, but there isn't so much information about what these two actually mean. Especially with the media, there's so much fear-mongering about what hard Brexit is, and can we have a soft Brexit with the single market, or can we not? That aside as well, I think one of the major issues for young people living in the UK especially is housing. I mean, if you take a look at the housing market, the average first-time buyer is 39 years old, and that's very, very old. So, of course, young people are going to be concerned. Sorry, no offense.
Wrong room.
Sorry, guys, no offense taken in that sense, as in, if you're a young person and you're looking towards independence, so me, for example, so I'm 22, and I'm looking to move out of my parents' house. I'm not looking at, 39 years old, that this is the age that I wish to get out of my parents' house. Not that being 39 is any issue with it at all. Aside from housing as well, education. This is something that's usually used as a political tool in the general election and in the EU referendum. So in the general election last year, we heard, there'll be no rise of tuition fees. And then, surprise, surprise, we had 9 grand. And then similar thing with the upcoming general election. Now we're hearing, there might be a scrapping of tuition fees. So there's so many more issues than tuition fees that apply to young people, such as jobs as well. We have more jobs after Brexit, we have less jobs for young people after Brexit. So it's not just one thing that applies to young people, it's very many issues.
Okay, cool. Do you have any thoughts on that, Jack?
Just kind of echoing what has been said about Brexit. Whilst Brexit will be the issue that will have the most impact on young people, there's 7.4 million 18 to 24-year-olds that could vote in the EU referendum, but only 36% actually went out and voted. So it's going to affect them, but we're not telling them how it's going to affect them, because like Yasmine said, is it Yasmine?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, sorry. Like Yasmine said, we're being told we're going to have a financial crash from one side, we're being told loads of jobs are going to be lost, and then on the other side, you're being told that there's this brand new horizon, we're going to have trade with everyone, we're going to get loads of investment in. Who do you believe? Because engagement in young people isn't where it needs to be. Only 43% actually voted in the general election, so more people went out to vote for the general election than the EU. So whilst the EU is something that's going to affect young people the most, it shows that they do care about other things, such as housing, such as mental health, and other things like that.
Yeah, so Caroline, you're obviously head of Young Labour. What's the most important election issue for young people, do you think?
I think after Theresa May, and her mates, brought us into a referendum that essentially was just to appease some backbenchers, and now she's walking into a Brexit where she will probably do more to appease those backbenchers and therefore bring us into the very hardest of hard Brexits. We need to be looking at this as a political juncture where we can change course. So even though it's been a chaotic 12 months, we now need to be talking about the things that actually matter, and the reason that people were so angry when they voted in that referendum. People were angry because there isn't affordable quality housing. People were angry because the NHS is underfunded. People are angry because education is underfunded, it's understaffed. And the only way that we can actually change that is to invest more in these areas. We need to stop talking about how some evil EU is taking from us, and now start talking about what we can give to our country, what we can put in so that we can start to grow again. It's a brilliant time to just stop, pause, go in a different direction and start talking about things that matter to young people instead of carrying on down some course where we've got Theresa May about to rip apart workers' rights in the name of whatever our backbenchers want to do.
Tom?
Well, not to be boring here, but I also think that the main issue of this general election is Brexit. This, whether we like it or not, is in some ways a kind of diminished second referendum in some respects. The Conservatives know that, the Liberal Democrats certainly know that. Labour are pretending that that's not the case, which is one of a million reasons why they're incredibly irrelevant in that respect. But nevertheless, I think any attempt to suggest that it's not about Brexit is one of two things. It's a profound act of cowardice, it's an attempt to ignore it entirely, or it's an attempt, as we've just heard, to suggest that Brexit wasn't what it was. I think Brexit was the best thing to happen to British politics in a generation. It was a moment at which the British public stood up to a technocratic elite. They said it was a question about who rules, and they said we rule. It was an incredibly positive, progressive thing. And yet all you hear in response to it, and all we've heard over the last 12 months is, this was a mistake. This was a piece of party management gone wrong. These people didn't know what they were doing. They were just brutalised by austerity, and therefore they're just doing this unthinking. Bless them, let's look after them, maybe we'll get another response the next time. No, what we're looking at here is what we need to do in this election, not necessarily if you're a Brexit voter, but if you're a Democrat, is to say we need to resolve the unfinished business of last June. And that is to say that our vote must be taken seriously, it must be carried through. That doesn't mean soft Brexit, which is another word for not Brexit. That means leaving the European Union and its various sovereign smashing institutions, and it's making good on the promise of the 23rd of June, which is that question of who rules. And once that is established, all the issues that we care about are enriched, because we've made clear to the elite who've proved themselves that they hate us so much over the past 12 months that we recognise that the most powerful force in British politics should be what we, the public, think. This is another opportunity to reaffirm that principle.
I think Yasmine's itching to respond to that.
I'm so sorry, I'm going to have to disagree with what you said. I don't understand how you can sit here and say that Brexit is one of the best things that's happened for Britain when it hasn't actually unravelled yet. We haven't seen the benefits of Brexit yet, and the government nor young people know what's actually going to happen as a matter of Brexit. Thank you. as a young person, I've always grown up and reaped the benefits of the EU, from, sitting in my university lecturers with people from all across the EU, to having the opportunity to study abroad as part of the Erasmus Plus scheme. Now, I'm very worried about such a scheme and the future of it. So far, it's been secured until 2020, but Theresa May has still refused to comment on its future post-2020. And don't you think that students growing up in the UK and in the EU should have the right to travel abroad and have a cultural exchanging experience and reap the benefits of meeting new people, new languages? We're moving closer, we're moving every single day in the news, we're seeing security threats that are globalized. How do you think Britain is better off coping on these issues alone, as opposed to working with other EU countries? I know that today isn't about whether or not, I agree with Brexit, or whether or not Brexit should go ahead. I think we should completely respect democracy and, look forward and look for opportunities for young people to have their say in key Brexit negotiations. But I don't believe you can sit here and say that it's the best thing that's happened, because it hasn't happened yet.
Okay, Hannah, Hannah, do you have any thoughts on that? Is Brexit going to be good for young people, bad, a mixed? Can we even tell?
Yeah, I think I hasten to agree with Yasmine that we can't really tell at the moment. And the thing is that while we've had our say on the idea that we want to leave the European Union, what we haven't had our say on is what that deal is. And the thing, you don't go into a business deal without knowing what the contract is. And you don't, when you sign up to a phone contract, you can change it. And when you buy something, you've got 2 weeks to say, actually, do I want this? And that's why the Green Party is pro a second referendum, not because we don't agree with the result of the referendum, although we were pro-Remain, but actually because I think that you do need to say, is this what we wanted? Because I think a lot of people have got a very different idea about what Brexit means to them. And having a deal on the table that is perhaps a hard Brexit, or having a deal that's a soft Brexit, that might not work for those who voted Leave or those who voted Remain. So I think actually it is worth us having we need our input into what that means, because it is our future that is at stake.
Okay. So Hugh, you worked on the Leave campaign, so presumably you don't think we're just sort of like flinging ourselves headlong into the unknown. What do you think the impact of Brexit is going to be for young people? What do you think the benefits are going to be?
Yeah, well, I think, just as we saw during the referendum campaign, I think what hasn't really stopped is just the constant predictions of doom, the idea that it's going to be a complete disaster for young people and for the whole country. I think all of these predictions of doom before the referendum, none of them have come to fruition at all. And in fact, yeah, and I think I agree with a lot of what you said. We gain a lot from working together, but the key thing is that you don't need the European Union to cooperate on things like security, and things like education and research. When you look. No, sorry. When you look at, let's take the Erasmus scheme. The Erasmus scheme already includes 3 or 4 non-EU countries as full members. The UK has 7 of the 10 best universities in Europe. I don't think it's in the EU's interest to cut off access to them. And the government's white paper has committed to remaining involved in schemes like Horizon and Erasmus. So, I think the idea that the only way you can ever work together by tying yourself into a huge sort of bureaucratic structure is simply not correct.
So Jack, as a Liberal Democrat, I suspect you might have a somewhat different take on this, maybe not. Do you think this is true? We can do a lot of the cooperation outside of the EU, and it doesn't really matter that much?
Well, firstly, you can see the division already happening on the panel. This is representative of Britain now. And when we had the referendum, people having such strong opinions. Sorry, what's your name?
Hugh.
Hugh, okay. Hugh voiced his opinion, and with respect, the audience started heckling, started getting him. You're not listening to what he's saying. I don't agree at all. Let's just get that clear. I don't agree at all. But we need to be more open to listening to other people's opinions, because if we're just listening, because otherwise you're not going to convince people of your point of view. Equally, I've had opinions that I've changed because I've listened to someone who had a different opinion. They had a different perspective, a different view. They helped me see that view. And then as a result, I bettered myself and Sorry, I forgot your question.
But, no, just whether you think it's true that we can have a lot of the kind of international cooperation, Erasmus, all of those kind of things. We don't need the EU.
Well, if you view it as collective politics and individual politics, if you look at Trump, if you look at Brexit, we're moving away from a collective politics of working together, moving towards individual. Because people are aggrieved about things like austerity, etc., and they're thinking, all that money is going to the EU, why are we not spending it on housing? Why are we not spending it on other things? But we get much, you don't see what we are getting from the EU. We don't see all the research funding we get, all the agricultural farming we get.
So that money all comes from Britain in the first place. You know, we're a net contributor of over £12 billion a year. It's not EU money.
But you don't know if that money is going to go to agriculture. Theresa May, the only policies Theresa May has announced so far is, we might have a vote on fox hunting. Who cares about that? Yeah. We're going through the biggest...
Exactly, who cares about that? The number one issue is Brexit. I just want to return very quickly to this question about how can I say that Brexit is important. I think it's, and how can I say that it's radical, in fact. The point of Brexit was it was a question about democracy. In democracy, nothing is a done deal. It is up to us. And
democracy didn't end on June 23rd.
Of course it didn't end on June 23rd, but you have to, all I'm saying is you've got to understand the unprecedented nature of that vote. The British public dealt a blow to the existing order in the face of the moral blackmail of the entire political, media and capitalist class, and all we can do is say it's a terrible thing. Why don't we ask them again? Clearly this issue is unresolved still.
Okay, so as you can clearly see on the stage, as Jack mentioned, there's like a huge division. And although we can sit here and debate whether or not we think Brexit is good or bad for the country, as I said before, I think it's really important that collectively, as young people, we stay together and we look forward and we mobilise. So on that note, as Chief Operational Officer of My Life, My Say, we're a youth engagement charity and we're based in London. And what we aim to do is to get young people talking about Brexit. So it doesn't matter if you voted Leave, it doesn't matter if you voted Remain, it doesn't matter if you didn't vote or couldn't vote. What we want to do is hear young people's views. So what we're doing next week is we're launching our National Conversations Week in partnership with Bite the Ballot and other youth organisations across the UK. And what we're doing is we're launching Brexit cafes, or what we call decaf cafe sessions. And what we do is we get a group of 15 to 20 young people to talk politics over coffee, to create that, you know, that 1970s era where young people just get together and it doesn't matter of their views, but collectively they have the same concerns. And that's what I think we should all do today instead of debating whether or not Brexit is bad or not. Let's just move forward and mobilise.
Okay. Caroline, Labour's very much caught in the middle of this kind of argument, isn't it? You've got people in Labour who are kind of really anti-Brexit, and then you've got parts of the Labour Party votes of the country where people vote quite strongly pro-Brexit. So do you think that's, like, do you think it is possible to reconcile those kind of like opposing?
Yeah, I do. I think that if you do come together, like Yasmine was saying, you can reconcile those things, because I strongly disagree with this young man over here, because you can say that it's cowardice to start talking about real issues, but actually Brexit has happened, and we now need to think of what we are going to do moving forward. Politics continues. Politics has been completely ruptured by politicians that don't do what they say. Loads of young people voted Leave for something on the side of your bus, Hugh, that never really materialised, or in fact, it was disavowed 12 hours after it came out. And if we want to actually give young people faith in politics, we need to be starting to talk about our country and our issues again in a way that is progressive and positive, and a way that engages them. And frankly, yes, Brexit is happening. I'm even saying anything about agreeing or disagreeing with it. I'm saying, well, if we, in the negotiations, we need a platform that protects certain rights. We need a platform that actually thinks broadly about our trade agreements, that thinks broadly about where we're going to be in 20 years' time. May has probably called this election because she is scrabbling to do just that. She doesn't know what's going on. And frankly, to suggest that we're cowards for actually talking about housing and health and education when our public services are falling around our ears, I ain't a coward, mate.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to give you a chance to respond to the accusation, sure. and then we'll go to audience. Okay, so I'm just going to give Hugh a quick chance to respond to the accusation that the campaign wasn't entirely honest at all times, the Leave campaign, and then Jack wants to make a point, and then we'll go to audience questions.
No, I mean, if you go to the Office of National Statistics, it is right there. The amount that we send to the EU, that is money that we don't have control over. We will be getting hopefully full control back over that when we've left the EU, and I really hope it gets spent on the NHS. Obviously, Vote Leave aren't in government. Theresa May was in the Remain campaign. It's sort of you can make all sort of pledges, but if you're not in government, then obviously you can't do them. And I absolutely think that we should do that. But when you look at the reasons why people voted to leave, I think actually exit polls on the day show, 50% of people, the fundamental reason was who makes the laws in this country? Are the laws made in this country by people that we elect, and more importantly, people that we can throw out when they make laws that we don't like, or are they made by a group of commissioners in Brussels who no one's even heard of, let alone has any way of getting rid of them? There's no press scrutiny, there's no way to get rid of them. We just have to 60% of our laws are being made by people that have no accountability whatsoever.
Okay,
and that's exactly why, and that's why people voted to leave.
Go Jack in then. Okay.
So,
Sorry, Jack, just wanted...
no idea where that 60% figure came from.
No, let me explain. Okay, 13% of EU laws are directives which are issued by the European Commission and then have to be put into UK law by secondary legislation. The other 47% come directly through as regulations which are put straight onto the statute book with no oversight from Parliament whatsoever. That totals 60%.
Which rights would you like to get rid of? Workers' rights, trading rights, which ones? Maternity rights, which ones do you want to get rid of?
The point isn't about which ones to get rid of. The point is that after Brexit, we have the power to actually choose which laws we want to keep and choose which laws we want to get rid of. At the moment, we have no power at all.
Okay, so when we do leave, after Article 50 is triggered, if we do leave, because just Liberal Democrats' policy is you have a referendum on the deal you're given. If you have the opportunity to accept that deal, which we'll respect, or if you think that deal is not good for Britain, you have the opportunity to remain. But let's say Article 50 was triggered. After it's triggered, all of EU law then becomes UK law automatically, doesn't it?
Yep.
And then Theresa May said ministers will have the opportunity to either change or get rid of any laws they want to get rid of without going through Parliament. How is that? Where's the democracy in that?
Those powers have only been issued in the very limited sense of actually changing the wording, where it refers to an EU institution and has to refer to a UK institution. It's not going to remove any checks and balances from our system.
Okay, Yasmine.
So just on the note of unfair campaigns, to be honest, I'll be very honest and say that I think there was a distortion of statistics on both sides of the campaign. And I wasn't talking to young people while I was working saying vote leave or vote remain. I just wanted to hear what they had to say, and that's what My Life, My Say does. We're non-partisan. We don't care whether or not which party you vote for, as long as you're confident enough to speak on the issues that matter to you. I think if we're talking about the unfairness of campaigns, I think we need to talk about unfairness when it comes to young people. I think the government should really think about its voting process and its lack of political engagement. So one of the things that was rampant in the EU referendum is that it's always held during exam season. How do you expect young people to leave all their university studies that they've paid 9K for in order to get out and vote? So I think we really need to look at our voting system. That aside, not a lot of young people know about proxy voting, which you can get someone on your behalf to vote for you if you're living outside of home for university. The other thing is, I think in politics, when you say politics to young people, they often think Westminster. They think, for example, so I was speaking to a young girl in Blackburn, and she said to me, I don't really care about politics because I just believe it's pale, male, and stale. And if you do look at the news, that is what you see. And I think what we need to do is we need to get young people to realize that politics is whether your bus service runs on time. Politics is whether or not you wait 2 hours or 3 hours at your A&E. And these conversations need to be had, but they need to be had in schools where children spend 8, 9, 10 hours a day. I think we need to campaign. Thank you. We need to campaign for political education in schools. We need political and citizenship education. If young people don't know who to go for when they have an issue, they're not going to grow up knowing what politics is. They need to know the difference between their local councillor and their MP, and they need to know which issues are political and which issues are not.
Okay. Okay, straight to the audience questions. So yeah, I'm going to throw it out to the audience now. I think we'll start with a question from Hugh Smart. Is there Hugh Smart somewhere? Hugo Smart, sorry. So Hugh, you want me to tell you what your question was? So your question was going to be about why young people in the UK... Yeah.
My question was, in the UK, typically the youth are the ones that are in support of the European Union. But if we look at the continent, what we find is the opposite is true. We find, you look in Greece, we look in Spain, we look in Italy, we find it's the youth that are the anti-EU crowd, and it's the older generation that are pro-EU. I want to know what you think the reasons for that, although given the unemployment rates are pretty easy to see why, but also how that can be rectified, and do you think it's got a future if you've got this level of no support at that sort of age bracket coming through the European Union?
Okay, Hannah?
Yeah, so the Green Party runs a training scheme called 30 and 30, and every year that included, perhaps not anymore, a trip to meet our MEPs in the European Parliament. And last year, it was sort of early year when we went, and we had a session where we spoke about the European Union, and almost everyone was negative about the European Union. It was, it doesn't represent us, it's undemocratic, and all of these things. But then when we went this year, everyone was so positive about the European Union. And I think it's that, actually, it's what we've lost, or what we feel like we've lost, that made us be so positive about it. Because ultimately, I have problems with the European Union. I do think in some cases it can be more democratic. I do think that it is very distant from us. But ultimately, I do think there are benefits. So I wonder if there's an element of, the campaign that's whipped up and that has made us feel that we love it so much now.
Well, I think the gentleman already gestured to part of it in the question, as far as if you look at Greece, why are the young more Eurosceptic? 45% of them are unemployed, and that's not just a question of austerity. They have experienced firsthand what happens when you elect a government that the European Union and the Troika don't like. They don't take it. They'll crush you. And that's something which I think really actually rings true for a lot of young people on the continent in a way it doesn't people here. Now, in terms of the question of are young people in the UK thoroughly pro-EU, I don't even think I think it's a little bit overstated in some respects. It's quite clear that it's unclear what the turnout figures are. It's certainly, according to all the polling and studies that have been done, it's quite obvious that out of the people who did vote, there was a majority in voting in favour of the EU. But the idea that we're often presented, often by quite old people, trying to use young people as a kind of stage army against democracy, that young people are all the sort of people who would, paint their faces in the EU colours and march on Westminster of a Saturday. I find it hard to believe that people from Stoke and Swansea, etc., young people there are actually believing in that. But also, I think one thing we have to recognise is that even that being the case, I think young people need to really understand the opportunity that Brexit presents them with, because it is an opportunity to reshape politics, to bring democracy and political decision-making back home. And the idea that we should rethink that, or maybe we shouldn't have voted leave in the first place on the basis of the Erasmus scheme, cheaper roaming charges, or interrailing, is frankly quite insulting. I forget who said it, but anyone who would trade their freedom for cheaper roaming charges deserves neither, and it's time that the young people who are unsure about that start to look at what's really at stake, I think, because it's not just about individual policies, it's about the future of our democracy itself. Democracy means your opportunity to change things, and that's what I think the message needs to be, not just to young people, but anyone at this point.
Okay, Caroline, do you have any thoughts?
I do a lot of work with my counterparts in Europe. So I've worked, for example, with the Socialist Youth in Spain and in France. And actually, it's not quite right to say that it's perhaps more progressive governments abroad that are at fault here with huge rising unemployment. If you look at the example of Spain and some of the movements that have been formed there, there is definitely a pro-European message coming through, but there is also we're now trying to establish how we can change European democracy. The European Union is undemocratic. We know that. You don't have to convince me that these laws are coming from commissioners. They are. That's a fact. But that doesn't mean that leaving it is going to make a difference. And I've always said this. We are working all over Europe to make sure that young people are actually at the forefront of changing what the European Union can be. They are being submitted to no work, no no ability to move out of their own home, no ability to think more long term to have their own families and things like that. And actually, we can't blame the European Union for these issues, and we can't suggest that the European Union has crushed certain countries. We have to look at national governments for that. But
So you're saying it's the REITs' fault rather than the...
what I'm saying is that actually, if you believe that the EU is fundamentally undemocratic, then young people can be at the future of changing that. And just by saying that, yes, young people in Europe are anti-EU, well, yeah, they don't have to be. They can actually take a little bit more ownership about what the future of Europe looks like, work to change it, get involved with the European politics, and actually make a huge difference across Europe. If we make a whole difference across Europe and we have people working in economically stable countries, everybody benefits. We are not part of some single country world anymore. If they succeed, we succeed. That's the way it works. And I think, just one more point, I think that's also why youth in this country are pro-EU, because we live in a globalised world. We are constantly communicating with those that happen just to live over a sea and aren't different to us in any way. And we understand that our future is not just on our island, it is across the world. And if we're not working with partners across the world, then we don't have that successful future that we dream of.
Another question? Another question?
Yeah.
Yeah. Could I have a question from Mark Fisher, please? Mark Fisher? No? Okay. Stuart Small. Yeah? Do you remember what you were asking?
My secondary question, not my first question. I think I want to change it slightly, if you don't mind, very quickly.
Okay, let's go for it.
For me, when I've only just started going into politics after the referendum, because I was quite amazed that we actually voted to come out. But the one thing when I go canvassing is how can we get youngsters to be engaged in politics? So the question I'd like to ask you is, why don't youngsters want to get engaged? Why do they feel disadvantaged? And how can we do as a community to get them engaged? Because if we can't get you engaged, we haven't got a future. I'll leave it like that.
Okay, that's an interesting question. Jack, and then you. Yep. Yeah. Jack.
So young people do want to get engaged. If you go out and speak to them, we're always being told young people want this, young people don't want this, young people want this. But no one speaks to us. People zone our voices out. People are saying, oh, he doesn't know what he's talking about, he's young, he'll learn when he's older. That's not helpful to moving forward. If you instead of being our voice, okay, just support our voice. And that's by listening to us, talking to us, asking us what issues we like and want to get involved in. So that comes from your political parties, it comes from, like you said, at school. If people get told about the issues, people get told that their vote matters, people are, like, if you talk about the Progressive Alliance, I know I'm going off a bit of a tangent here, Progressive Alliance, stepping aside for another party, well, that's saying that if you have the values of this party, you're not going to have the opportunity to vote. Your vote doesn't matter because you've been stood aside. But in terms of getting people involved, it really is as simple as talking to us. Talking to what issues do we care about? How can we get involved? How can you support us to get involved? And with the Lib Dems, personally, my local party is really good because they ask me what skills I have, what can you do, when are you available. It's just about talking to us, essentially.
Do you want to go, Yasmine?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. At My Life, My Say, we've definitely seen young people are definitely not disengaged. They're very much engaged, and they're engaged more than ever because they've now realised how much politics affects their future. I think, to answer your question, one of the reasons why young people maybe don't go out canvassing or, haven't accepted to canvass with you on that one occasion is because it's always, oh, young people are a tool when it comes closer to the time of a general election or closer to the time of an EU referendum. But no one ever talks about young people when, when it's just normal everyday politics. As a young person, I think it's quite patronising of an MP to ask me to take a selfie with him or her just for their own, political benefit. I think if I want to, respect my MP and I want to kind of engage in politics, I want my MP to be talking about issues that matter to me, like mental health, like my education, like me traveling abroad and the opportunities that are available to me. And just to add to that as well, I think there's a huge issue of underrepresentation in Parliament, and I think I've just mentioned this as well. I think as a woman, especially, if I look at the female MPs that I aspire to kind of work towards or be in the future, for example, like Diana, but like Tasmina Sheikh Ahmed, they're constantly being slandered in the media for what they wear or their past relationships or what they've done wrong or how they said something in an interview, regardless of the logistics of what was said. I think we really need to respect women a lot more. I think there needs to be that opportunity. Only 8% of women MPs are in UK Parliament. I think we really need to work to campaign towards bettering that statistic. You look like you are.
Well, first of all, I don't think I've ever seen Diane Abbott criticised for what she wears. I mean, her gross incompetence is plenty to keep people going, but nevertheless, my main point is...
I said logistics aside of what was said, I'm just talking about her being a woman of colour in the UK as a female MP.
That was an offhand comment, but nevertheless, fair point. The thing I'm interested in is this question of how do you get young people engaged in politics? And I think it's looking at it entirely the wrong way round, because it suggests that you break up politics on the basis of demographics, how old you are, where you come from, the idea that you can't be appealed to on the level of big transformative ideas. And it makes perfect sense. It's not just that young people are disengaged with politics, vast swathes of people are disengaged with mainstream politics. It's understandable that young people, having never earned the habit, is more likely to collect there. And I think the worst thing that you can do is try and break it up in terms of these issues. And just in relation to the question of Brexit, what I think is really fascinating is I find the kind of fetishization of the youth vote in relation to this stuff, the talk about votes for 16s, incredibly cynical. Because I think that the people who are pushing it, whether it's AC Grayling, whether it's these other people, the people who, on the one hand, want to disregard the vote of 17.4 million people, have suddenly got interested in franchising all these other people. It's just because they assume, as I say, that this kind of stage army against the things that they don't like, that they too, as Ian McEwan was saying yesterday, there'll be all these new Remainers suddenly spawned who we can use. So if you're going to get young people engaged in politics, it's how you get anyone engaged in politics. You up the stakes, you present them with big ideas, you show that their vote counts for something. It's not about giving them giveaways, it's not about playing to them, it's not about patronising them, and it's certainly not about just hoping that talking about enfranchising them just because you think they'll vote the way that you want them to.
Okay, on the theme of youth engagement, is Madeleine Kay in the audience? Have a question? No? I might ask her question on her behalf if not. Okay, so Madeleine wanted to ask, universities were once the centre of political activism. What can be done to combat the depoliticisation of university campuses and student newspapers due to legal issues, accusations of bias, and students' lack of engagement in politics? Hannah,
I can run with that. I went to uni around the time of, in 2010, which was an explosion of political activism on our campuses, and a lot of the people that were involved in the student process of 2010 are now deeply involved with the political process. So you can see that actually getting involved with campus activism has a transformative effect on the political system in general. I think it has to be, and I'm almost agreeing with you here, it has to be about big issues. Students are often, because I disagree partly by saying students don't vote. I mean, suggesting that young people aren't a demographic is ridiculous because young people don't vote, which means you don't have to appeal to them, therefore your political messaging is completely different and completely skewed. That's just how politics works. So what we need to be doing is talking about big issues that affect young people, because that doesn't currently happen. Young people are never the target audience of elections, except this one. Because young people are actually going to make a huge difference in the outcome to us, because they are more likely to vote for progressive parties. You have to connect with them on big issues. If you look at the white paper that's been put around university the way that the universities will be run moving forward, it's been all of the issues that are basically in a privatised our system very, very slowly have been buried under piles and piles of bureaucratic nonsense, and the NUS has been working to combat that. Do boycott the NSS. If any of you are students in here, it will make a lot of difference to the teaching education framework. That sounds really boring, but it's actually really important. It's hard to sell this stuff, but you have to because it makes a difference.
Jack,
The second part of the question was kind of about censorship of ideas on campus. So the word safe spaces, safe places gets thrown around. I think there is room for that, for sensitive issues, such as violence, mental health, things like that. There should be a space for people to talk openly without fear of being judged or being ridiculed. But I think one university banned the Sun newspaper from their campus. But people are still going to go out and buy the Sun. Just because they're not getting it from that place, they're still going to go out. People are still going to have these views. And when people ban speakers coming in to speak because they have a different opinion, it goes back to what I said previously. Challenge that opinion. Don't pretend it doesn't exist, push it to the side, because people do have that opinion, and you need to go and challenge that opinion, don't just run away and hide from it.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that you've almost bought into the rhetoric of ban. It's not a ban, it's saying that I don't want this here, and that's a very different thing. I think that, there are ultimately what you often see with politics is that with education, that's kind of the be-all and end-all about when we talk about young people, and I almost see like this question is part of that, because young people aren't just where they go to school, they aren't just where they go to university, and I'd really, really like to see a broadening of issues in this election towards mental health, towards housing, and I really hope that with the weeks we've got left we can go to that. So yes, perhaps universities aren't as active as they should be, but also perhaps the world isn't as active as they should be. Perhaps people aren't as interested in politics anymore, because the politics that I see and the politics that I'm offered is a bunch of white men. It's what Yasmine said, and I'm bored of that. I'm bored of hearing a bunch of white men or a bunch of men in general just arguing over each other, shouting over each other, because I just don't care. And it doesn't actually, in all of these games that they play, it doesn't show how the world is, and it doesn't show politics off in a good light, and I would much rather hear about the issues rather than just petty infighting, and we really need to move away from that.
Also, just to quickly add to, I think one of the roles that universities should play as well is to drive voter registration. So even though those in universities are already, they're already 18 to 18 plus, not everyone is registered, and they should also encourage students to encourage younger students. So to go back to their old sixth forms, to go back to their old colleges, and talk to young people and make sure that they register to vote.
Okay. I think just one more question. Is Charles Parcell in the audience? Charles Parcell? No? If you someone, would you like to?
Will you take a question from the floor?
Absolutely, sure.
Great to see a young panel being so dynamic. So that's a start. I have four children. My youngest is 17. My eldest is 23. They are not particularly well engaged in politics. But my question to you is: this has been very university-centred, especially the last few questions, and I guess that you are all university educated. My question to you is: what do you think the future holds in terms of those young people who are not going to university, who are going into apprenticeships or some other equivalent type of practical skills work? How do you see Brexit as shaping up for those people?
I think that's a really important question. Hugh, you've not spoken in a while.
Again, I think it comes back to the huge opportunity we have to really boost engagement, with people from all across society. Thanks to Brexit, Brexit was divisive, but it was divisive because more people were engaged in a democratic exercise than basically ever have been before in this country. So whether you voted Leave or Remain, I think far more people are following politics. They want to know what's going on now than ever before, and I think that applies to people whether they've been to university or not. And I think And you know, it's easy for us who have been to university to, you know, to sit here and say, things are fine. But actually, when a lot of the issues which actually led to Brexit, it is for people that haven't been to university who are struggling, because there's a huge surplus of labour in the economy, because things like EU freedom of movement. It seems great when you think about it in principle, but in practice it means that certain areas it's harder for people to find jobs. There are pressures on public services, and let's not forget that actually in the countries that people come from, they end up losing a huge amount of talent. You get the brightest and best people leaving countries that desperately need them to help developing. You get workforces leaving countries that desperately need them, and because they're all coming to Britain, which isn't going to be a sustainable way forward. So I think with Brexit, the huge watershed moment it is in our politics, this is really a moment for everyone to be really re-engaged with the political process.
Has anyone got anything pressing they want to? Okay.
And that, thank you for your question. I think it's really, really important as well that you've highlighted it. I don't believe that only politics should only be exclusive to those who studied politics or actually went to university at all. I think one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about the work that My Life, My Say does is because those democracy cafes that I mentioned earlier, we do not just go into schools and sixth forms, we actually reach out to community centres, we reach out to those who are disabled, we reach out to those who haven't had such opportunities, we've reached out to people who are not in education, training, and employment or apprenticeships either. So I think what the future holds for them is very questionable. I think I would be lying if I sat here and I told you I had an answer. But I think it's very important that collectively, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 of us, each campaign for those people, especially because they don't have the right to vote yet.
Okay, let's try and take one more question.
Margaret Clark. I have recently retired from primary education. I was a head teacher for 14 years, and in our school, when it was local elections, we had candidates, they were all invited to come and talk to our children. In each class, our children had 4 questions which they could go forward to. That happened. We then held a vote in school to see which of the candidates they felt they would vote for. When it came to the general election, we did the same with MPs. So I would like to ask, what do people on the panel think they can do to get more into primary schools? And it starts there, not just in secondary schools.
Okay.
I'm a primary school teacher, so when I'm not messing around in political panels, I am in schools every day. And I think what we need to be talking about is proper political education, a proper PSHE curriculum that covers citizenship, that covers democratic engagement. We've done exactly the same thing. We do whole school councils where we put up candidates, we invite candidates in, and in general, we can engage young people with the political system. It's trickier in primary. I mean, I've done lessons with year 1 students where we make little rosettes and talk about how you persuade people to buy your ideas and stuff. And that's where it starts. It goes on to a bigger system where we need to be thinking about what happens in secondary school, because I think that is where you need a more proactive role about engaging people with their right to vote and how they use that vote. So it involves some political consideration of the curriculum, making sure the curriculum actually encourages citizenship, and it therefore needs a government that is actually interested in empowering citizens by looking at the curriculum and empowering it to do that.
Yeah, my political career as it is started when I was on school council in year 3, and I think from there I developed, I went on to youth council when I was a young teenager, and it was then that I actually developed my understanding of the issues that I'm so passionate about today, whether it was transport, and the thing that mattered to me at the time was the bus service that I used every day. So I think actually the problem with a lot of school councils and the problem with a lot of youth services I find is that they tend to be led by older people who don't listen to the young people there. I never felt like the school council I was on could make a difference. I never felt like the youth council I was on could make a difference, because I had a load of youth workers telling me what I could and couldn't do. So actually, if we are engaging in these exercises, then young people actually do need to be listened to, whether it's candidates coming in, whether it's school councils. And it doesn't need to be tokenistic, and I think that when we ask questions like, what can we do to support younger people, we need to be aware of that I'm not just a leaflet deliverer, I'm not just a person who has a voice but you're going to ignore it anyway. So actually listening to us would be really helpful. Thank you.
So just a quick point, I'm a secondary school teacher, and I have conversations in tutor time about issues that have come up in the news, and it goes back to the previous point, people do want to talk about it, people do want to hear both sides, but the argument against, or what I tend to hear, is you can't deliver it without bias. Well, teachers do that every day in all the lessons, they deliver content without bias. That's just a quick point I wanted to make.
Okay, awesome. We've got time for one more question, I think.
I just wanted to ask particularly about political education in schools, and obviously trying to get people engaged in what is politics. You know, the fact that, as you mentioned, you know, everything is politics, everything's affected by politics, and there are lots of programs and things out there. There's like, you can be a young member of parliament. There's things like Bite the Ballot you can get involved in, and I think the problem is you have to already be engaged to be able to get involved in these things. So how can we make it so that it's easier for young people who are maybe interested in these issues but not so much involved in it as politics, and get people involved so we have a much wider, kind of much more diverse group, rather than all being kind of university educated and all, you know, all from very middle class areas.
Yeah. Anyone from this side got thoughts on that? Do you want to?
I don't mind. I'm sure you've all heard in schools there's a team called the Connections team, where they kind of like talk to young people about which career that they're kind of looking to head towards, or that kind of thing. I think given that it's a resource that's already available, that I think we should utilize it, and kind of, as organizations like My Life, My Say and Bite the Ballot, which we work with very closely, I think it does fall on us to kind of reach out to those avenues and kind of let young people know what events are taking place or what activities that we've got going on, and make sure we do that. But that aside as well, I completely agree with what's been said so far about the complete revision of the UK curriculum. We keep telling young people that knowledge is power. How many people in the audience have heard knowledge is power? Pretty much, I'm sure everyone has. How can we tell young people knowledge is power when they're not even being given that knowledge? So I think, first and foremost, we need to campaign for a UK revision of the curriculum. But secondly, we do need to make sure that organisations such as My Life, My Say, Bite the Ballot, UK Youth, Shout Out UK, and all the other ones, we do use such resources.
Hi, Lucy. You okay? Thanks for your question. So, sorry, I know Lucy, so that's why I'm saying hi.
Sorry, guys, I should have said that.
So I think, just to repeat a few things, it does come from primary all the way up to secondary, but we have the youth parliament, a few candidates in my school, and at the start of the year we tell them this is when you need to get your application in, this is some of the issues you could talk about, and then we have all of the students up on the stage and they say what issues are important to them and why, and then they go away and we find that they talk to their friends to say they talk about issues that are important to them, and it kind of grows from there. That's what I wanted to say.
Yeah.
Could I just very quickly say the best way to implement decent statutory political education is votes at 16?
Okay, okay, so this is our last button up, so you've got like 45 seconds.
45 seconds, cool. No, I really hate this word engagement. The idea that the problem with young people is just they haven't been talked to enough, or they haven't been presented, they haven't been told this is how an election works, is not fundamentally why they're checking out of politics. And I think what's brilliant about the situation that we're in now, the fact that all of the old parties are kind of decaying, the fact that this huge blow for democracy is taking place, young people, old people, over 39, who knows, has an opportunity to create a whole new politics, a whole new democratic politics. It's not about engagement, it's about ideas, and we can all be involved in that.
Okay, I think on that note, we're going to have to wrap up. I know, I'm sorry, there were still questions. Thank you to all the panellists. I think this has been a really interesting conversation.
Wonderful.